UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasions, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Crossfire.
There we go. Welcome to UAP Crossfire, where the alpha males get into it about ufology and try to bring you the real deal, what's happening in the UFO community today. And we got a fantastic guest, probably the leading ufologist in the United States, if not the world. I'm so happy he's here with us tonight. But first, I want to introduce our wonderful co-host on this show. First, I want to go with the Padre. He's known as the Padre, but his real name is Dan Carlson. Dan, how are you tonight?
You know, I'm getting over the flu, but I'm here and I'm fully functional. I got all green lights. I'm ready to go.
Oh, fantastic. And of course, our man who pilots the United States all over the place. If he's not in a plane, we don't know where he is sometimes. And that is our good friend, Commander Cobra.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Padre. Yeah, it's been a little bit dull the last couple of weeks. It hasn't been the exciting stuff. But, you know, that's what leads to the exciting stuff, is the periods of not having exciting stuff. So it's been an interesting time, as you know, working as a contractor for the Department of Defense these days. And the return to the office has been exciting, and reacquainting ourselves with proper decorum when we're in an office setting is very, very interesting. It's been a lot of fun. And hopefully moving along at a good pace.
Outstanding. And of course, Don Ecker was supposed to be with us tonight, but he is under the weather. So we want to just send out and say, Don, we miss you, and we hope you get better soon so you can join us and start arguing with us like we usually do every Thursday night. All right. Well, listen, I'm not going to waste time because I'm telling you, I'm so excited about this guy because, you know, Richard Dolan is the leading researcher and historian writer on the subject of UFOs. He's the best. He's an author of 2 volumes of history, UFOs and the National Security State, both groundbreaking works, which together provided the most factually complete and accessible narrative on the UFO subject, and it's available everywhere. He also co-authored a spectacular book about the future, AD After Disclosure. And that's very important because we don't know what's going to happen after somebody comes out and says, yeah, they're here, they're walking around, get used to it. You know, so I mean, that's something that I think everybody should pick up, AD After Disclosure. The first ever analysis that not only how UFO secrecy might end, but how the all-important question, what happens next? Richard is also the author of a UFO for the 21st Century Mind. He's written more books than I can actually do. I would have to take a whole show to tell about all his books, but he's got another great book came out. I'm so proud to know about it because secretly I kind of tried to help him with this a little bit, a very little bit, but that was it. It's called The History of USOs, all about underwater ufology stuff. And let's bring on Richard Dolan.
Hello, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on here. It's really fun. I'm sorry Don Ecker can't make it. I always love Don.
Don is a great guy, and well, we're really happy to have you. So first, I want to ask you, how did you get into ufology, Richard? I mean, that's always been my question. I've always wanted to ask you, you know, because you really dive deep into the ufology. You've gotten information that nobody else has ever had, and you produced it to the public. I remember about the Admiral Wilson papers and everything else that you had, and you made sure it was vetted before you came out and said, hey, you know, here's the real deal about it. So how did you get into ufology?
Well, more than 30 years ago, I was in a different life. It was a different time of my life, a different time in the world. Back then, I thought I just wanted to teach history at some American university. So I was working on U.S. international relations, the Cold War, Harry Truman's presidency, and all of that. And I was in a bookstore and I stumbled across a classic book. You all know it, by Timothy Good, Above Top Secret. And it was on a display there. And I remembered flipping through it. This is like 1993. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting because he has a lot of UFO data about different governments and militaries. And there were a lot of names that I recognized from my own academic work, departments that I had studied. But he was putting them in this whole different context of UFOs. Whereas, as we all know, in the university world, especially in the 90s, that did not exist. You did not study flying saucers when you're working on a PhD. So, but I was intrigued. I bought the book and I thought it was a really good book. And I started getting online, again, before there was even a web, but there were still news groups out there. And I just went down the rabbit hole. And I thought, I'll spend 2 or 3 months because I just wanted to solve one question, which was, is this actually a thing or is this not a thing? Is this all BS or is there something to it? Because here I am studying the early Cold War. This UFO stuff overlapped with what I was trying to become an expert at, I thought. And I just didn't want to have this big question mark hanging over this area where I
Rich, your mic is not working properly.
Well,
there you go.
There you go.
Good.
How much did we lose there?
Not much.
Just
Just a little
All
bit.
right, well, all right, thank you.
In your volume. That's all.
Hopefully we're good here.
You're
I'll
great.
make sure that we got the right microphone going in here. It looks like we do. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, long story short, I just thought, look, I want to get to the bottom of this. I'll take a couple of months out of my life to see, is this a thing? Is this not a thing? Was there a conspiracy to hide the truth about UFOs or not? What did the national security people think? And that was my famous last words. I thought I would do this for 2 months and then get out. And here I am now, three plus decades later, because needless to say, I was persuaded that there was a lot of evidence involved in this phenomenon. A lot of it was very well documented, U.S. government documents from Freedom of Information and the like. And I thought, let's go deeper and deeper. The next thing I knew, I wrote a 500-page history, and that's what started me off in this field.
Well, let me ask you this before I turn it over to the other guys. What was the most important piece or the most piece of information that you discovered, that made you a believer?
There are a couple of declassified documents. Most of these are well known to researchers, but back in the 90s, they were new to me. So one famously, of course, is the Twining memo by General Nathan Twining in 1947. He says to another general, Charles Shulgin, the phenomenon is real, not visionary or fictitious. That caught my attention. And then even more, it was a document from 1952 to the director of the CIA from his director of scientific intelligence, a man named H. Marshall Chadwell. And this is after a whole months of massive numbers of UFO sightings over the United States. 1952 was a big year. And Chadwell says to his boss, Walter Beadle Smith, he says, sightings of unexplained objects at altitudes and speeds in the vicinity, at very high altitudes, very fast speeds near sensitive U.S. installations are of such nature, he said, that they are not attributable to natural phenomena or known types of aerial vehicles. When I read that carefully, I'm like, okay, this is the head of CIA scientific intelligence writing to the director of the CIA, essentially saying, boss, there are serious things going at speeds that we can't match, at altitudes we can't reach, over sensitive installations, and they're not natural, and they're not anything that we know. So I thought, yes, I'm convinced. So that was, to me, made me realize that the intelligence community was and continues to take this seriously. And furthermore, I never really found any resolution in the history to like we figured this out. There was nothing like that. There was no generals, no scientific inquiry, no classified or open, in which anyone really solved this. But meanwhile, the government kept lying. And the last thing I'll just say before I'm done with this, I'm always surprised. Like, there's all kinds of people who are willing to disbelieve the United States government on a whole range of things. Like, we all know the government lies on this, government lies on that. But then, like with some people, like the skeptics, they'll believe the government on every single thing about UFOs. It's like, you're going to be critical about this, but this whole huge area where they're clearly ridiculing, they're clearly lying, you're just going to take them at their word. Like, that never made any sense to me.
No, it didn't make any sense to me either. Dan.
Good evening, Mr. Dolan. It's nice to meet you. I'm very
pleasure.
grateful that you're here with us tonight. You have said that disclosure is both impossible and inevitable. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, well, it was a nice little paradox, which I wrote for After Disclosure, which 15 years ago, that book amazes me. But yeah, I mean, disclosure is one of these things where, you know, you can look at it on one, you know, the trajectory of our society, where we're not in the 1950s or 60s or 70s. Like, everything is always in a process of change. We now have internet. We can now communicate with each other around the world. Information's flying all over the place. And so on that basis, I always believed at some point, something important is going to leak out. It's going to be uncontrollable. It'll cause some kind of avalanche. When that will happen, I don't know. How exactly, don't really know. But I believe on that basis, it's inevitable. But it's also impossible in the sense that, again, this is my own interpretation, but those groups that have the genuine information on this, and it's beyond government in my view, that they have no incentive, none that I can see, for actually giving up this whole secret. Now, so that's why it's impossible and inevitable. And, you know, it's like the immovable object versus the irresistible force. It's a little bit of that. And how this will break down is unclear. When I wrote that was 15 years ago in a completely different era. And what I would say now is we're seeing that let's call them the ruling establishment, the elites, whatever. I think there's a bit of a recognition that they realize this is a secret that cannot last forever. I mean, the world is moving on here. And so I can imagine that there are conversations to the effect of, okay, well, this will come out. Can we manage this? We don't have to give up everything. We don't have to give up all the information. Maybe we can give up a little bit in order to retain much, much more. And I do suspect that that might be a desire. Whether that will be the reality, how that will turn out is a whole other question, which I don't know.
A follow-up question related to disclosure. My background, I'm a retired meteorologist, now a pastor. And so I have an interest in the impact of disclosure on the religious community. A lot of people have said, oh, it's going to upend and upset everything. I have a different view than that. What is your view on the after disclosure impact on world religion?
My opinion on that's changed over the years. Back in 2010, when I wrote that book, I might have been more inclined to think that it would be kind of a catastrophic thing for religions, at least if not immediately, then maybe over the course of a generation or two. I could have imagined that, you know, new people coming into the world with this reality, maybe having a hard time accepting some of the, you know, more stringently held aspects of beliefs of various religions. I could have imagined that. But I don't know. I'm a little older now, and I don't know if I have that same opinion. I would imagine, just speculating here, that the major religions of the world, I'm thinking Christianity, but also the others, you know, I mean, look, in the history of Christianity, there's been a lot of different variations of that belief system, from the early 1st, 2nd century Gnostic traditions that were definitely infused in there, to all of the other different permutations that have been out there. So it's not like there's just been one Christianity anyway. So I could imagine that there would be new variations of that belief system that could spring up, that might offer, you know, solace and hope to a new generation of people. So I don't know. I don't think religions are going to go away, or a sense of this spiritual nature of our world. It's something I believe. I have a much stronger spiritual faith than I did when I wrote that book back then.
Well, I can tell you that as somebody who has been in ministry most of my life, at least on the side, if not full time, Christians are very comfortable with the idea of a super intelligent non-human species interacting with us cross-dimensionally. The terminology may have changed over the years, but it's nothing new really for us. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. And not just Christians, ancient people throughout the world took it as a given that there were intelligence and powers that were beyond them, and you wouldn't want to mess with them all either. So, we went through this era of scientific belief and dominance. We're still in it, of course. And we kind of convinced ourselves that we're at the top of the totem pole now. But I have a feeling that ancient people in some ways may have had it more right.
Interesting.
Commander, what are your thoughts?
Well, Mr. Dolan, or as we have fondly said in the past on old KGRA before it was DB meetings, when we were in the same room and we were trying to figure out how to keep the station.
I remember.
And you said, I just remember you saying, Cobra? Who is this guy, Cobra?
Well, you took a pretty cool name.
Yeah. God love you for the honesty on that part of it. I there's a bunch of areas I want to jump in with you tonight, but the first one I want to start with is I have lashed out at what I consider the self-appointed betters in the elite community. That I think there's a very small core group that probably has the evidence in a way that's not comfortable to disclose. But do you think the cabal, as I like to refer to it, is starting to lose their grip on this?
I don't know. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, it's just because do you think that that's part of where we're at right now? That there's, you've held on to a secret. It's like parents, right? They hold on to a family secret. They don't want something to come out. And now, in the age that we live in, I see people that I consider not that bright, but think they're the smartest people in the room. And they don't realize that while we're doing a show like this, people are typing on their keyboards on another screen while they're listening to us, looking up things that we're talking about. And not everything that you are going to, survey is going to be true, but you can start in a very short amount of time, get pretty good analysis. Do you think that this, where we're at, it's finally going to slip, that they realize that it's slipping, or are they going to split apart, and some are going to try to maintain the old guard and others are going to say we need to be ahead of this? Because it's, how do we maintain some kind of position?
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple of years ago, I would have been a lot more skeptical that they would lose control of the narrative. But I don't know. I mean, I just saw an article today. Trump's looking to cut funding for CIA. Forget USAID. He wants to cut CIA. And you can see that there's a shakeup going on within the U.S. bureaucracy and U.S. government. Who knows really how far that will go? But clearly, what's undeniable is that there is a shakeup happening within the U.S. Bureaucratic governmental structure. We can all see that's plain as day. And so in that kind of a context, I could at least peripherally imagine that something might get shaken loose in terms of UFO or UAP, as they call it now, secrecy. That's not impossible. But I would never, ever underestimate the ability of these people to maintain control over their narratives through their influence in establishment media. Yeah, I know it's ossified. No one cares about CBS or ABC or MSNBC, whatever. But they still have tremendous power.
Right, and people still do look at them.
Yeah, exactly.
They run networks that have predominant, although it's decreasing, they do have predominant cachet with a lot of the population. Right. I mean, right. I think that what they do on radio is much more important than they do on television.
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, but they certainly are very well entrenched. And so you never want to rule them out. It's not like the CIA is going to walk away from the table and say, here's all of our secrets. And not just them, but what we don't really know is what is the actual structure of this secrecy? Like, who are the people we're talking about? Is it the people at CIA? Well, I think in part, yes. But is it private contractors? Yes, definitely. It's certainly private contractors. We've almost got complete confirmation of this now. So I liken it to like a labyrinth, this very intricate structure. And You know, I've referenced this a few times. About 5-6 years ago, Tom DeLonge put out a tweet, and it was a really on point tweet. I need to find it. But he said, look, if you really want to get to the bottom of this, you're going to need a legal revolution. And I think I understand what he meant. It's like the secrecy is buried under layers and layers of legal protection. So that, I mean, you're going to need the best accountants and the best lawyers and investigators in the world to probably penetrate some of this to find out who's got what and where. On the other hand, it's true, like more and more is coming out all the time, so that we're almost used to a weekly, if not daily, new bombshells dropping all the time. So that's something that we're not used to. We're in a new era. We had Jake Barber just a couple of months ago. And before that, we had David Grush, and there's all these other people coming out, Randy Anderson, and all these other very interesting individuals. So who knows? I think that we are. I think that we're going to be looking at more bombshells ahead. So, which is going to be the one that actually pushes us over? I mean, think of it this way: if we were to all go back 10 or 20 years, and we were to then learn that, oh yeah, in a few years, all of these revelations will come out. The Navy will come out with all these videos, the Tic Tac incident, USS Omaha incident, all of the other people have come out, Ryan Graves, all of these amazing stories. Like, we would have been blown away.
You would have said, stop it. That's not going to happen. Most people would have
said.
Not
only that, but we would have said, oh, well, that's definitely going to cause full-blown disclosure.
Right.
And it hasn't done it. And so that's the thing that I certainly underestimated. I think we probably all did. We just assumed a couple of big things come out and it will force the control group to just give it up. And they have not done that. They are fighting for every yard of that football field. So, there could be a lot more that comes out in the next couple of years, is what I'm saying, that may not lead to the disclosure that we might once have thought it's automatically going to happen. I don't know. I mean, get the popcorn ready. I'm just as curious as everybody else. I don't know how to predict this one.
All right, Rich, I got one quick follow-up to this. Do you think that what I consider the malfeasance, that I think it probably started out with best intentions? The RAND study that you and I have spoken about, not directly, but we have spoken about that. Everything will crumble, and we can't have that. I think it's more based on technologies that will upset how we run the world economy right now. If you have breakouts in how energy is produced, if you can make energy, if not free, nearly free, so cheap that it changes these changes, that power structures are going to fall, they're going to change, they're going to transition, and it may not be an orderly transition, and especially for the folks that are holding the reins. That anything that they're not holding the reins is not orderly transition, so they're not interested in doing that, or they want a slow process. Do you think that that's a big motivator here, though, that we have some malfeasance, that we have some direct conflicts with our Constitution that we've set up? Because I think one of the things that you've touched upon a number of times, it doesn't get a lot of good play, is that we have this founding document that seems to pretty much say straight up how we're supposed to be behaving. And then we ossify it with multiple layers of more and more legislation, rules, laws, quote unquote, that follow up the works. Do you think that has a root cause to this? Why we keep screwing around trying to get to this point?
I think I get what you're saying, and I think I agree with you completely. In other words, why did the secrecy happen? I mean, I think about this a lot. If we rewind the clock and go back to 1947, and you're Harry Truman and I'm your top general, and I say to you, sir, we have apparently recovered technology that doesn't seem to come from this civilization, this planet. And by the way, there's a couple of aliens it looks like we got. So you get this information and you're thinking, should I tell the world? I have no doubt that Harry Truman must have wondered, even for an instant, should I tell the world? Right? But then, of course, his advisor would all say, bad idea. First of all, I mean, what we know in 1947 is that the Soviet Union, the Russians, were trying to get our atomic secrets at that very moment. The U.S. had a monopoly of the atomic bomb back at that time, and we were not interested in sharing that. The United Nations was making a play at that time to have the U.S. put the nuclear technology under international control. And America's answer was like, no, thanks. We'll just keep this to ourselves. We're not going to share this with anyone. So if we didn't want to share atomic technology, how in God's name are we going to want to share alien technology, something that exotic? Like, I couldn't possibly imagine. So what they would do is, what is exactly it looks like? You can have Truman saying, okay, this is our game plan. You're going to be in charge of overseeing the technological exploitation. You're going to be in charge of the secrecy. You're going to manage the media. You're going to manage the academic community. We'll do studies to see if the public's going to panic. All of this. Everyone's got their job. And he might say, let's revisit this in a few years and decide what we want to do. But the problem is there's never a good time to give this information up. It's never a good time. You don't want to, because it's all being weaponized. You don't want to give it to the Russians or anyone else. And then furthermore, once the secret starts going, now like someone's making money here because you've got the future in your hands. This is what I believe. And so there's all kinds of incentives. Once you retire as a 4-star general from the Joint Chiefs, hey, you get a nice little cushy job with one of these ground floor investment opportunities that maybe they're working on the next iteration of laser technology or high tensile fibers that just may have come from Roswell. I'm just speculating, but that's what Corso said. Maybe it's true. Point is, there's a lot of motivations for keeping that secrecy going because it's a huge moneymaker, and there's never a good time to admit to the American and world public that you've been lying about this for X number of years. It's not a good look. And now especially it's been 80 plus years. So, and then the illegality, which you pointed out, which I completely agree with. It's like, I liken it to a system of, I call it legal illegality. Like they create all these little fig leaves around them to give them the veneer that what they're doing is legal, but it's, I mean, when you really get down to it, it seems completely unconstitutional. So all of these reasons are there. And then there is the fact that it's the great unknown. I mean, we can, we're all in the bubble. Most of us, people watching, we believe in UFOs. We believe there's something anomalous to it. I believe that. But it's one thing to believe it. It's another thing to feel it like in your bones, and to then get to the point where, oh wow, this is now out in the public, and that means there are real aliens here. What would it be like if I met an alien? What if it can read my mind? What if it doesn't laugh at my jokes? What if it's got an IQ of 500? All of these things that can be intimidating. And so it is a great unknown that no government, especially one that's running an empire, is going to want to screw with lightly. I think there's a lot of reasons why they're keeping this very, very down, quiet.
One quick snapshot to you, Richard. You talked about Truman. I think another instructive part to this whole thing that history piles up with Truman. Truman claims, and it seems to be verified in various sets of records besides his own memoirs, that he had no clue where we were with the atomic weapon. That Project Manhattan was so well layered that only the folks and anyone that started to trip off the line was sent to a mental hospital to be a internee until after events occurred. Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty instructive to a man that then now takes the presidency, finds out about this, has to make those orders, and then gets this a couple years into the presidency that he has to deal with. How effective that was. So you're a historian. I'm an undergrad math major, so everything is either zeros and ones until I get to an uncomfortable spot, and then I have imaginary numbers to make everything work. You just take out the lowercase I, and it's all happy. So I just thought your reaction to that small piece.
Well, he was vice president at the time and was not briefed on the Manhattan Project. That's a fact. So this is, for people who don't remember, that's the project to build the first nuclear weapon in history, in human history. That's the Manhattan Project. Very important, but Harry Truman did not know. And not only that, they did the first detonation at Los Alamos in July 1945 before the detonations in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And when they did that, they had to lie about that too. They called it the explosion as some fuel depot, something like that, because people in the vicinity recognized that there was a detonation of something big. And they had to just keep a lid on it. And they succeeded. They completely succeeded in keeping. I mean, you had the most significant scientific event in human history up to that point that had just occurred. And no one knew other than a very small group of people. It's kind of amazing. And, if we hadn't dropped 2 bombs on Japan to end World War II, how long could they have kept that secret? It's a good question to ask. And we keep other things that deeply secret, by the way. When I was researching my very first book years ago, I did a kind of parallel research into the MK Ultra mind control programs. Those are deeply secret. We only learned about those by a roll of the dice of history, sheer accident. Honestly, I don't want to get into the whole thing, but these secrets can be kept for a long time. And in the case of someone like Truman, the fact that he was vice president of the United States of America, did not know about the Manhattan Project, and certainly, I'm sure what he was briefed on aliens was even more shocking than that.
Sure.
Richard, I like to go back to disclosure a little bit, because there's something that people have asked me, and I really don't have an answer on it. But I think this is something that you could answer. So if, let's say, the president does come out and say, hey, yeah, there's aliens. We've been visited. We have crash retrieval. We have dead bodies, the whole bit. And he comes out and he says that. People have asked me, how are they going to answer the secondary questions? Because now, once that's out of the bag, how do you explain abductions? How do you explain that scientists have said they're walking around us, they look just like us? How do you explain different things that people know, they're in the know, like Hal Puthoff? I'm sure he's an amazing scientist, but I'm sure he's in the know. He's been with all kinds of secret projects. How does the government come out and try to explain those type of topics?
Well, when Bryce Zabel and I wrote After Disclosure 15 years ago, this was one of the most important issues that we raised, and it prompted me to think that you can't do a partial disclosure for this exact reason. So let's say the president comes up and says, "Yep, it's real. There's UFOs and there's aliens." So that is going to clearly lead to a whole host of follow-up questions like, how are you able to keep this secret for so long? What does that say about the nature of our political system, our media, our academic community, the control mechanisms that had to have been in place there? But that's even the least of it. Other questions. Oh, so you've been studying their technology. How far have you gone? Do we have the ability to go off-world like some people have claimed? Do we have our own flying saucers like some people have claimed? What about abductions, as many people have claimed? Like, it's going to be very difficult. Now, what I suspect is that if you have a disclosure, so what is disclosure? I guess at the most bare bones level, it's, let's say, the president saying it's real, they're here, something along those lines. UFOs are real. Some of them are alien, whether they're from another planet, another dimension, another whatever. They're not us. So you can start there, but you can't end there. And
right. Exactly.
There are many layers. How deep does this go? Like, this is going to be the real question, because we researchers may have certain ideas about what we think is happening. Do we think that there are some that look like us and walk among us? I happen to think probably yes. So, sue me, call me crazy, whatever. It's what I think. I can't say I know this. So the government's going to be in this position. And let's say they decide, we are not going to tell them X, Y, and Z. Come hell or high water, we're not going to tell them that. That could be it. Because what if there's something really bad?
Well, exactly. And that's exactly my question to you, is because people have asked me, especially abductees, they've asked me about the Eisenhower incident, where He was missing for days. Then they all say,
Yeah.
now I don't know much about it, and you probably do much more than I do, but there's a belief that Eisenhower made a deal with aliens that they could do abductions, and it started getting out of hand. Now, how do you, if that is true, and I don't know, but if that is true, how does the U.S. government take control of that? Because, I mean, that would, I mean, it would actually destroy the government's credibility after that.
Well, the Eisenhower story is one of many that indicate a potential U.S. government communication with aliens. So for people who don't know, that's where Toll was in 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base, and Eisenhower was in fact missing for a couple of days. That all of that is true. And there have been claims, in fact, some of them right at the time that made this claim that he had somehow had a deal with aliens or met with aliens. And there have been subsequent claims of that over the years. So it could be true. I don't know. But to the larger point of, is there communication going on between us and them? I mean, what seems logical? To me, it seems logical that the answer could be yes. Of course it could be yes. It's not impossible at all. So, I mean, this is potentially a ball of yarn that can never be wound back up together again. Once it's out, you can't put it back together. One person, an insider, let's call him that, referred to it to me as toothpaste out of the tube. And once it's out, it's not going back in.
Back in.
So, we're in a great list of unknowns here. And how deep is the reality is the real question. That's the real question. Like, does the government know that they're walking among us? Or will the government just say, well, yeah, we did get a couple of artifacts here. There was a body, but we haven't heard from them ever since. Like, would they say that? Who knows?
Well, I can tell you that if that in fact happens, if that comes out by a super credible person that says they're walking among us, I think that's going to change the landscape of how people look and do this. I mean, scientists have already said that, but if you get a government official like the president, the vice president, or something saying they're walking among us, I absolutely think that things will change. I mean, that's my belief. But here's the other thing that he took away at one of the hearings that they had. And it boggles my mind because nobody is looking at this. And it's probably one of the most interesting and diabolical things. David Grush came out and said, hey, people have been murdered over this and injured. And
it wasn't even a speed bump. It didn't even seem to get like a speed bump kind of acknowledgement.
I mean, you're talking people killed over this, Richard. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, why are we surprised? You look at the history. There have been a number of suspicious deaths of people in the UFO, of researchers. These are just people who are public. Now, do we know they were murdered? It's hard to prove some of them. But it's really not surprising to think that people could have lost their lives over this. This is a huge secret. This is a huge thing. I mean, it's been subject to ridicule for so long that many people, including scientists and other overly educated people, they tend to think, oh, well, there can't be anything serious about it because all it is the subject of jokes. Yeah, there's a reason it's been subject to ridicule. It's been very important to kneecap this subject as much as possible. And so the ridicule is one aspect of trying to put this all to sleep. It's very important. And we're talking about the implications of what's bigger than the implications of non-human, highly intelligent, probably telepathic, possibly hive mind people that are here. They can run circles around us in all kinds of ways. They're doing something that's important to them because they're all over the world with technology that's beyond what we're able to do. How is that not absolutely mind-bogglingly revolutionary? Like we tend to forget this. Even those of us who are in the field, we start to get used to it when we take this all for granted. Just as every good once in a while to just stop, take a step back, and have this snap moment where you realize just how big this is. This is huge. And so it's not surprising that David Grush would say this. And I found David Grush to be very credible. Personally, I have been able to chat with him, at least briefly, and I found him very, very upfront, very straightforward, highly intelligent, And I think he knows exactly what he's talking about.
Part of controlling.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
Part of controlling narrative is controlling the flow of information. And one thing I've noticed, and I know you've spoken to this too, Mr. Dolan, is when you try to find information about UAP and UFO now, and you go into search engines, it seems like, especially like YouTube or something, where you're going on and trying to find, someone like you who's speaking on it, you're directed immediately to platforms that either are directly or indirectly owned by legacy media outlets, or outlets that are in it for money and clicks and likes. Could you speak to that, please?
This started happening at least 10 years ago. I started noticing. So you started, particularly on YouTube, is where it was very easily noticeable. Now, this is back, we're talking 2014, 2015. So when all of the big tech censorship was really starting to steamroll and become very big. I noticed with UFO searches on YouTube that they would increasingly lead me only to like CBS News and mainstream, useless, insulting, intellectually barren YouTube channels, and it's become a struggle. Now, it's a little. I don't know if it's the same quite as it was. I mean, there's been a reaction against that. We've been very vocal about it, but I think the long-term tendency is going to be more and more of that. I think we're still moving toward. We're seeing a reaction against this kind of centralized global digital system, but that doesn't mean it's going to stop. So I would look for things like that to continue, even with a temporary pause. But I suspect that'll continue. That's the kind of world we're moving toward.
Are there platforms that you find are less likely to do that you recommend? Personally, I find a lot on X that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't really do a lot of social media. I have to say, I have a couple of people who help run my social media for me. Sorry, folks, but that's just the way it is. But no, X is an active place. The thing about X is, I just put it out there. I'm glad Elon Musk bought it, even overpaid for it, because it really was the last bastion. It was where free speech was still able to exist.
Yeah, if X had fallen, we would really be in a dark hole.
I could not agree more.
You can't get anything else to follow, because it would nothing been commercially viable, and we live in a world that's commercial viability is critical on that.
Yeah, and as someone, I live in part on those platforms, and I was able to see, like, it was becoming very difficult. What am I allowed to say now? What am I not allowed to say? And you never really know. And it's still kind of that way with YouTube. They'll still ding you for things. It's like, are you serious? But I don't think it's as bad as it had gotten. And but anyway, yeah, I think X is fine. For news, I'm always looking for independent voices. That's really what it comes down to, whether it's on YouTube or Rumble or X. I'm looking for people who are not connected to large, like corporate organizations. So that's the number one thing. And, I look for the voices that I have come to have trust in, and also voices that allow me the opportunity to fact check them myself, So
thank you.
That's it.
Commander.
Well, I'm going to, it's not a setup question in any way, but I think you'll probably understand why I'm interpreting it this way. Are we at a point right now with the kinds of things that are happening in the bureaucratic state of our country that we are approaching a better time for disclosure? And what I mean by that is the layers and the calcification. That's a big fancy word, especially for the math major in the room here tonight. Is that what we are seeing is laying this up? Because when you look at this, to me, the conditions are starting to set up that say trillions and trillions of dollars of debt, money that's being moved around from countries, this goal to achieve some kind of stable peace on the planet. Is this the thing that squares all those, writes all those checks? covers that you are going to have that realignment. To me, there appears to be a lot of indicators that we are approaching that kind of a time, considering the things that have just recently happened in the last 10 years, since 2015. If you look at 2015, a pivotal point for a lot of things that have happened, we went into some very dark areas globally. But
yeah, I agree.
I look at our country as the primary area, as the barometer and also the compass of what we're doing.
I think from what I'm getting from what you're saying, that I tend to agree with you on what you're saying. So I'll try to rephrase it in my own way. So the last 10 years have been absolutely, it's like taking it's like you take a snow globe and you just shake it up. Everything's all over the place now, in a way that has not ever happened in any prior period of UFO history. And I feel confident in saying that. I've studied all of that history, and there have certainly been ups and downs, and there have been moments in the past where it looked, oh, maybe there'll be a disclosure moment. Yes, those happen, but not what we've seen for the last decade, especially since 2017, a kind of nonstop, almost a full court press that's becoming more and more intense. It's not lessening, it's getting greater. And that is something that's allowed, by the way, the UFO community to expand dramatically. We got podcasts all over the place like this one. And there's many people out there now who have an active voice in this. And there's a lot of good voices out there. So the community's larger. There's greater interest. The information's coming out. So all of that's amazing. At the same time, politically, we have the United States has brought itself to the brink of a serious crisis. I mean, not long ago, we were about to have, in my opinion, World War III with the Russians. I'm very, very grateful that we seem to be stepping back from that. I think that's a good thing. But more to the point, you mentioned the debt. That's quite significant. Not enough people are really on top of this, but it is a potentially catastrophic situation. But on top of that, now we're, whether people love Donald Trump or hate Donald Trump, it is undeniable that this man is a disruptor. He is a disruptor. Joe Biden was not a disruptor. You could have liked Joe Biden, fine, be my guest. But Trump is a disruptor. As I think I mentioned here, I just read an article. He wants to cut CIA spending by a significant amount. He wants to cut military spending by a significant amount. Will he do it? I don't know, maybe not. But you can see the efforts of DOJ right now. I mean, they are doing things that are shaking up the federal bureaucracy. You can disagree with that, but the point is that by shaking it up, it seems to me that it becomes a little more likely, perhaps, that something will shake loose. And that could be something to do with the UFO phenomenon. I don't see that as impossible. And the other thing about Trump and UFOs, it's pretty clear that he has some interest in this. His son, Donald Jr., is verifiably engaged in the subject. And during the first presidency, we know Don Jr. talked to his father about Roswell. We know that Trump's late friend, Lou Dobbs, was seriously into UFOs and had Trump's ear on that. So there's people close to Trump who are clearly into it. I don't know if that would have any effect whatsoever on whether he's going to say anything, but you can see that there's a potential kind of UFO friendly attitude that he may have. That may mean nothing in terms of disclosure, but with the other types of shakeups of things that are going on, there is certainly, you hear the word transparency being thrown around all the time now in a way that really wasn't the case before. Again, we can ask, is this meaningful or not? Maybe it's just a whole lot of hot air, but the rhetoric is there to a degree that it wasn't in the past. So, there are reasons to at least not to dismiss the possibility that something big can come out.
I want to ask you about the word that came out with Congresswoman Luna. Congresswoman Luna came out of a skiff with a briefing with David Grush. And she says that extraterrestrials weren't mentioned. Interdimensional was. And that word floated around for such time. Interdimensional. They're they're coming from other dimensions. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm not too impressed by that. I'll be honest. I'm not saying there's no such things as interdimensionality, but I mean, who the hell even understands what interdimensional even means?
I don't.
Seriously.
Yeah,
Everyone
if
loves
you-
to throw this out there. Who actually can envision what it actually means? Does
Well,
it mean? Well, there's all kinds of theories about this. What? Go ahead.
I was going to say, Richard, I remember one of the shows that we're on. I forgot who you were with, and I was listening, and I had to laugh because someone tried to explain. Can you imagine trying to explain someone to what is a light year when you hadn't defined what the speed of light is? What the hell does that mean? Is that a measurement in distance? Is it a measurement in time? What does that mean? So we throw up a new term, and to me, my spidey sense says, well, you just want to see who's talking about interdimensionality, and you're going to monitor social media to see where the squirrels are typing back and forth to each other where this is going. I think that you and I would agree that we do not know how other civilizations are operating, how they're powering, how they're able to transmute long distances and what we consider as a time consortium in our planet. But just to come out and say that, it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah, totally. I think we're in love with these really complicated ideas. Like we want things to be sexier than just beings from another planet. I mean, we just can't help ourselves. But think of it this way. We can all recognize now that the universe probably has a lot of life out there, and some of it's probably highly intelligent. So you only need really one thing for extraterrestrial interstellar travel to be practical. And that one thing is some way of kind of bending space-time just enough that you can circumvent the speed of light limitations. And I know there are astronomers that say, no, the distances are too great. You don't know what you're talking about. But you know what? There was a guy back in the 90s named Miguel Alcubierre. He came up with some math equations that determined that, yes, something like warp drive is feasible. Now, those equations, there's problems with getting the amount of energy necessary to bend warp. But you know what? I listen to other people, other smart physicists who say, no, it's actually not that difficult to get around. We can figure this out. So in other words, if there's someone anywhere that has the ability to do FTL travel, faster than light travel, then all of these objections, all of these reasons rather to go into things like interdimensionality somehow don't make a lot of sense to me. What's the most simple explanation? That there are beings on another planet somewhere else that can support life, and through means that we do not yet understand, we're able to observe us and learn about us and get here. And maybe some of that involves psi phenomena, by the way. You know, I'm not afraid to talk about psychic phenomena. Hell, I'm married to a remote viewer, and she's pretty good. And I've talked to a lot of these people. I have no need to be persuaded that this is real. So if there is a society that has a ability literally to detect us, like use the force, like, seriously, is this actually impossible? Can they detect us psychically? I don't know. I don't rule any of that out. I don't know what the answer is, but to me, an extraterrestrial solution to this still makes more sense than the other stuff. Now, interdimensionality, like Luna was saying, well, it's not impossible that they can be both. If you can play games somehow with space and time, which I think they can do, time is a dimension, space is a dimension. So if they're able somehow to maneuver through that dimensionality, that might qualify as interdimensional as well. I don't really know. Does it mean that they live on the other side like ghosts or other entities or angels or demons? I have no idea. But I think it would be very foolish to eliminate the extraterrestrial aspect of this from the equation, and probably wrong.
Well, Sir Dolan, I think, pushing back here because it is called Crossfire. For those of us who are spiritual, and you've said that yourself you've grown spiritual, we would acknowledge that there is a realm we cannot see or perceive on day to day. We're in touch with it in certain ways, but I think that sometimes when we talk about interdimensionality, we're talking about something unseen but parallel going on with us here. And since that seems to be so prevalent in ancient history. Should we be so quick to dismiss that?
I wouldn't dismiss it. I take your point for sure. And, it's just, these are, we're talking about different hypotheses and theories here. So it's one that I would never go so far as to say, oh no, we need to throw the IDH out the window, the interdimensional hypothesis. I wouldn't say that. I think that interdimensionality very likely does factor into this in some way. But I will just say, for me, if I want to go into Occam's razor and just ask myself what seems to have the fewest problems, I would probably still lean toward an extraterrestrial explanation. That's just my own take on it.
We've got the Nords, we've got the reptilians, we've got the mantis, we've got the Greys. It's like Earth is like a intergalactic 7-Eleven with all the races that seem to be popping up around here. And
maybe it is.
Really, you think that there are that many that might have developed this interstellar technology?
Well, think of it this way: if you look at UFO sightings, I'm not a nerd about a lot of things, but I am a nerd about UFO sightings. So I go to the National UFO Reporting Center pretty regularly, and as Chris DiPerno hinted at, he did genuinely help me in my USO study, which maybe we'll talk about that.
We're going to talk about it next hour.
Yeah, by getting me access to the MUFON CMS. So that is the database there. And I've gone through a lot of UFO data, and I continue to. And I can tell you, UFO sightings, good ones, happen around the world basically every day. Now, of course, we all know a lot of them are prosaic, a lot of them can be explained away. But when you just read through them, I have something I call the wow test. If I read a case and it makes me say wow out loud, I'm interested in it. It's not scientific, I'll admit that, but at least 1 out of 10 the cases that I will read in a database, I'll just say wow. So I think there's a lot that's going on that's probably legit, and it's around the world. So that tells me you've got a very large infrastructure and a large commitment by other beings to being here. They find our waters interesting. They find our land interesting. They find our life forms interesting. They find our people interesting. They are into this place. And why shouldn't they be, by the way? And why shouldn't they be interested in us right now, where we're about to leap right into their world? We've gone for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years as hunters and gatherers, very simple. And then suddenly 250 whatever years ago, science, industry, technology, railroads, telegraph, cars, aircraft, nuclear weapons, computers, AI, strong AI, and everything. It's like in the snap of a finger. Of course, if there's a group of people that has the ability to observe us, of course they're going to come check us out. We are the best show in the quadrant of the galaxy right now. That's us. Because we have, like them, we have the ability to make abstract thought. We have the ability to manipulate our environment. Like, we're a lot like them. We may be at a lower level, but this isn't a linear curve. This is an exponential curve. And so they must know this. And I would be shocked, frankly, if we weren't bringing in much of the neighborhood to watch us.
Yeah, I would imagine that's right. But I think we're putting on a bad show right now with the way the world is. Especially
we
the
can't
wars
help
and
it.
stuff. Yeah, I know. And stuff. But we're going to break right now, and then we're going to come back and talk about the history of USOs, Richard Dolan's new book. Stay with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA-db app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-db programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-db.
listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at KGRA-db.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at KGRA-db.com.
Okay, we are back with our guest tonight, Richard Dolan, and we're going to dive into his latest book, The History of USOs. Richard, I'm fascinated by this book because, you know, in New York, we get a lot of reports of stuff coming out of the water, actually getting water filled up like a gas station with some of these crafts that we see. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so I always think maybe there's a civilization deep in the ocean. So let's talk about your book, Richard.
Yeah, what a fascinating project it turned out to be. I'm very glad that on a whim, about 3 years ago, I just started going into it. I have a website. I love my website. I love the people who are members of it. It's called richarddolanmembers.com. Thank you. There's the plug there. But I love it because we had such a wonderful community of people there who are very engaged in this subject. A lot of really smart, knowledgeable people there. And they have their own platforms by which they can talk to me. And one of them asked me about a particular USO case. This is back in 2022. And so I did, like I will often do, I'll do private members' videos and presentations for them. And I did one on this particular case from 1945 near the Aleutian Islands, actually. And it's a very interesting case. And I've always been very interested in the water-based aspects of this phenomenon. I've always been. I was always a huge fan of the classic book by Ivan T. Sanderson called Invisible Residents. He wrote that back in 1970. That was the first book, at least in English, on water-based UFOs or USOs. So I've always been interested in it, but I think like most researchers, there's just a lot that I didn't know, a lot that I did not know. So during the summer of 2022, I thought, let me go into this a little more, at least for the website, and see what I come up with. So I thought, well, where are these cases? Where are the good USO cases? And I wasn't really sure. I was aware of the late Carl Feind, who is someone I really respected a lot. Carl wrote a very good book called UFOs in Water, and he had a website which had a nice database of a lot of these cases. So I went to that first, just before that site went down. I'm so glad I did. And then I got into the National UFO Reporting Center website. I got access eventually to the MUFON database, a bunch of books, George Filer with his awesome Filer's Files. I have all of the data off of those various places and much, much more. I just kept going and going. And I just kept hunting for good water-based UFO encounters. It's as simple as that. If an account looked good, like I could work with it, like there was a reasonably decent source on it, a reasonably decent amount of information, I said, okay, let's put this in here. And I ended up just writing. I collected just under 700 such cases. I went through thousands and thousands of potential cases. It's hard to know. More than 5,000, maybe close to 10,000 cases, to be honest. I got this 672 over what is going to be 3 volumes. All the cases have all been written up, every last one of them, right up to the end of 2024. So that's all done. And I just wanted to kind of breathe life into these cases. I mean, so many of them they're fascinating, and they were just never never really studied, hardly ever. I mean, there's a few that are well known. Researchers have heard about Shag Harbor in 1967. Sure, that's one. But for every Shag Harbor, there's like a couple of hundred other cases that are equally fascinating, or just about as fascinating, and not well known. So I started putting this together, and it took several years. I got an illustrator, Alan Levine, who back in the day was with APRO, with Coral and James Lorenzen. Alan's been around, and he's a good artist, and he did great work. And then I did more and more as it went on. Tracy, my wife, had some good suggestions. One was to create categories for every single case. So what I ended up doing was I put in about 15 or so data points for each case. So like, was it in a daytime or nighttime? What was the shape of the craft? What was the color of the craft? What was it doing? What was its relationship to the water? Was it under the water? Did it emerge from the water? Did it enter the water? All of these types of things. Were there electromagnetic effects? And on and on. Was it a military case? Who's military? I did that for every single case. How many witnesses were there? How close were the witnesses? And I ended up putting them all into a very large spreadsheet. I'd never done a spreadsheet before. This spreadsheet was humongous.
I'm surprised you were able to do 3 books with all that data that you're collecting.
It was a lot. It actually was a lot. But anyway, so I did all of that, and as a result of the spreadsheet, I got to tell you, like, I found patterns in this data that I would never have expected to find. But and I can get into some of those, but what I'll just say first is that there is a definite consistency to the data that the witnesses provided that gave me very strong confidence overall in the authenticity of the information. In other words, there are very consistent patterns, some of which could be predictable and others not predictable, but definitely they were there. So it makes me think that there's something here. A couple of examples. This is a simple one, like you would expect it. So when people reported a disc-shaped or cigar-shaped USO, just like with a disc or cigar-shaped UFO, predominantly the main color you hear is gray or silver, unless it's glowing. And you get that with USOs. Triangular USOs, a much smaller number, but nevertheless were almost always said to be black or very, very dark. There's consistency there, in other words. Now, here's something that was consistent but totally surprising to me. And I've mentioned this once or twice before. Daytime versus nighttime sightings. So, again, I have a data set of almost 700 cases. So, you know, it's not a trivial amount. I mean, it could be larger, but it's not insignificant. So up until around 1967 or so, I have a slight majority of these cases occurred in daylight. After that time, I liken it to flipping a switch. It was like 75% ever since to this day have occurred at night. And when you get into military cases, it's nearly 90%. So it's quite dramatic. So it tells me, A, there's a behavioral change that seems to have taken place in the late 60s, and B, there's an intelligence there in which they can recognize the difference between military and non-military ships. Also because military ships are twice as likely to be subjected to electromagnetic interference than civilian ships in terms of the cases that I have. It's almost double. And here's a crazy thing. In the few cases where someone either reported missing time in a USO encounter or having sightings of a being in a USO encounter, and that's a small minority of cases, but it's still there. Those cases have a 4 times higher likelihood than the average of experiencing electromagnetic interference. 4 times as likely. So I look at these and I'm like, this strikes me as logical, not necessarily expected, and it gives me confidence in the data.
One of our viewers on YouTube right now has a question for you concerning your book and interactions with USOs. He says the most important part of your book is how Navy carriers are affected. And he says he knows for a fact that our technology, our radars, our most sensitive encryptions are being broken all the time by such objects. Could you please tell us about that?
Absolutely. Very important. Now, in the volume that I published, which I'll be happy to show you right here. So this is volume 1. This is the paperback. Goes up to the end of 1969. And there's a lot of U.S. Navy and Soviet Navy cases as well in here that show all types of electronic interference, weapon systems going offline. But in volumes 2 and 3, there's more of this. And a lot of these have happened to major U.S. Warships, like aircraft carriers. For example, in this first volume here, several happen in connection to the USS Franklin Delano Roosevelt aircraft carrier, which was a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Some UFO nerds will remember that in Operation Mainbrace in 1952, the USS FDR was there in the North Sea and actually was one of the ships that had UFO encounters. Well, in 1954, the FDR was on the high seas on its way back to Seattle for repairs and renovation. And at some point along that path from the Mediterranean down South America, around the Cape and all the way back, we don't know where, but they encountered a large cigar-like object that descended from above, shot back up, came back down. 2 disc-shaped objects emerged from the water, entered the large cigar, which then went at an angle and went into the water. Now, during that, the ship tried to engage weapon systems. The person who wrote about this was a former officer of that ship, and he wrote anonymously to George Filer of Filer's Files. Is where I found it. This man was very meticulous. He said, look, certain things I can't tell you. Can't tell you who I am. I have a family to worry about. This is after like 40 plus years, almost 50 years when he wrote about it. I can't tell you where we were exactly, a lot of things, but he gave a minute by minute breakdown of their encounter. And literally at one point said, we tried to launch aircraft and they were not able to launch. I have a account going into volume 2, which I actually mentioned in this book's introduction here. From 1971, the USS John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier. On July 2nd of 1971, that aircraft carrier at 8 o'clock in the evening, and we know this from the ship's communications specialist, whose name is well known. His name has been known for over 25 years. James Kopf wrote about this. He described the communication systems on the ship and all of that. And suddenly on the ship's intercom, this is in 1971, he hears a sailor screaming, "It's God, it's the end of the world." So he's like, okay, something's going on here. So he goes out and he's on the deck and he looks up. It's nighttime, but he said there was this orange glowing sphere just above the ship, glowing, giving enough light for like half the strength of daylight is what it was like. So this is at night though, and this thing's lighting up the ship. And he said, I was only able to look at it for about 20 to 30 seconds. And then we had battle stations, general quarters, and I had to go back to my station. He said for the next almost half hour, the ship's communications were totally down. It was nothing but gibberish going in or out. He said, could not communicate. We were sealed off from the world. Now, I'm trying to remember if he mentioned weapon systems or not, and I can't recall off the top of my head. I think weapon systems were not functional either. But the point is, anything that's going to disable your nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed aircraft carrier for half an hour, I could be pretty confident that's going to the President of the United States.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no way that President Richard Nixon was not briefed on this, in my opinion. So these are important, and there's a lot of these types of cases. And by the way, the Russians have their own collection of them, and some very good ones, and very comparable to what you get in the United States. So there's something that's going on that does interact with the United States Navy, and undoubtedly the Russian Navy, and very likely, the Chinese Navy and other significant navies out there. The Royal Navy of the United Kingdom has had some encounters, as well as other nations. So they are now. Are they hostile or not? Is another question to ask. It's hard to say. I think they're very interested. They seem to indicate a pattern of interest in our technological capabilities, and why wouldn't they? I mean, we've gone through a revolution in the 20th century. We didn't invent our first submarine until the year 1900. That's when we first go like 10 feet into the water. So we go from basically having no capabilities to go down there to, by the middle of the 20th century, we had aircraft carriers. We, had militarized the sea lanes. We were going down deep. We hit the Marianas Trench in 1961. We were suddenly like going places. We put in a submarine, a system called SOSUS, which is a acoustic monitoring system under the water. Like we were, didn't take very long before we were leaps and bounds, just jumping over ourselves, one revolution after another. So I would not be surprised that they would find all of that very interesting and wondering, what are these humans up to now?
Commander,
do you, Richard, do you think we are headed towards a crossover where we are employing technology that we have recovered that is going to attract attention? Obviously, I would think that if you and I fall on the same continuum, we've recovered some technology. We may not completely understand how to operate it or even reverse engineer it, but as time has gone by, the cycle and the length of time to break that down changes and it gets shorter. We've seen that come through, and there's natural cycles, I think, that reduce that down. But now we are able to hybrid that with other things that we've discovered on our own, and that sends the signal out that says, do we need to be assisted? Do we need to be monitored? Do we need to be shaped or even stopped?
I could imagine all of those being actively discussed by aliens looking at us. As far as the technology part goes, I've always believed it's very likely that we've developed certain ideas and innovations as a result of having access to alien tech. But it's very hard to know, like, what specifically can devolve to alien technology. And it's very easy to hide that sort of a thing. I mean, honestly, in patents and things like this. I remember the late Bob Wood, who I always admired tremendously. He looked into this a lot, Dr. Bob Wood. And he believed that the transistor patented in 1947 derived from ET tech, not Roswell, but rather Cape Girardeau, which occurred in 1941. And he made a case that was, at least on the face of it, not the worst case in the world as to why that might have been the case. That might have been so. But it would have been easy for Bell Labs to, of course, not refer to the fact that they had alien tech to look at.
Richard, are you telling me that the film that I watched in high school that showed the spilled drop of water where they had the two negative lines and the one positive line, and that's how they broke the transistor, isn't how it happened? Are you saying that there's a possibility that fantastic Bell Labs film?
Maybe they had a little bit of a boost. I mean, the thing with the alien tech is, it seems to me, we can't really duplicate their material science. If you,
I think it's because we don't have the energy source to go with it quite yet.
Probably not. Or I mean, when you're dealing with the nanometer or the angstrom level of some of these things, where, I remember a few years ago, Hal Puthoff's talking about the so-called metamaterial, where you're talking about these layers of bismuth and magnesium that are unbelievably finely layered. And he was very open about it. He says, we tried to find out who could have manufactured this. He says, we couldn't find anyone who could remotely have manufactured this. The capability is way too advanced. And he also believed, by the way, that has served as an electromagnetic waveguide, i.e. some form of anti-gravitic function.
Sure.
So he said all of that. So I think the material science is probably where we are lacking the most. So when you think about alien tech, I could imagine that the biggest benefit at times that we might get from it isn't from knowing how to build something, but just knowing that such and such a thing is possible. I mean, sometimes, it's just recognizing that something is possible. That's the greatest obstacle of all. If you just go on the assumption that this is an impossibility, well, you're never going to give it a try. If you realize, though, that they somehow have figured out a way to zigzag through the sky and instantly accelerate, do it silently, now you're thinking, okay, how might they be able to do that? And that would force you to think outside the box. And I suspect there's some of that going on, so that we have our own versions, in other words, of alien tech, our version of it. That's my best working theory of that. So I don't know. That answers your question. Or
No, it does. It does. I think you and I track very similar on this. I've always been one that has looked at, I think, a critical eye when someone reports what they've experienced. Because I think when you eliminate, I'm going to say the vast majority of a sighting, that's when it really gets interesting. When you're able to know that actively deception. I mean, we know from the 60s that to cover technology, fairly conventional technology, the government engaged in putting out UFO reports and engaging in people that were interested in the UFO phenomenon as a means to cover up what they were doing.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I actually question.
Go ahead.
I do. In 1997, there was a historian of the CIA named Gerald K. Haynes who wrote a paper. This is in the 50th anniversary of Roswell. And I remember this very well. I was not yet, no one knew me at all. I was still working on my first book, but I was following this. And Haynes put out this article and he said, yeah, the CIA, all these years we said we're not interested in UFOs. Well, we kind of lied. We were. We put out some fake, we let the public believe in UFOs because we were doing flights of the ultra high U-2 aircraft and the A-12 Oxcart, the SR-71 basically. And we didn't want the public to know. And I'm like, that's a load of BS. You are full of it. And I never believed them. And I don't believe that. The U-2 aircraft, you got to ask yourself, how many UFO reports would that be responsible for? That thing flew at 80,000 feet straight as a freaking string. It didn't hover. It didn't descend. It didn't, it didn't change direction. How many UFOs is that really going to be mistaken for? I really want to know. And where did the U-2 fly? Flew over the Soviet Union for the most part. I mean, I'm sure it flew elsewhere. And then the same with the Oxcart. These are not, no one's going to mistake them for a silver disc-like flying saucer that hovers over your field and leaves landing traces. I read some utterly lame explanation of the Socorro landing in 1964 by Lonnie Zamora. Supposedly, this was a prank that some kids had pulled and faked out poor Lonnie Zamora, the police officer. I mean, now that wasn't a CIA thing, but
no, obviously it's a fairly weak story. I mean,
the links that people will go through. And so I think the CIA, I think Haynes, I called him out on this. I wrote my very first UFO article ever. Got published in UFO magazine when Don Ecker was there. So I was hoping Don would be here. But Haynes, in my opinion, badly misused his position as an academician, as a historian. I mean, you're supposed to be seeking after the truth, damn it. And when you use your position for anything other than a dispassionate search for truth, then you're engaging in a kind of intellectual heresy and you're in a disservice to the world. And I think that's what he did. It's my opinion.
Well, I guess what I'm driving at is I think that, and I see it, the trend now, that when you cannot control the information, when you can't control truth, you like to flood the field. And that's what I saw. I agree with you. I don't think Oxcart or the U-2 lends itself, but I do think that there have been experimental programs that have gone on,
yes,
aircraft-wise, that do lend themselves directly into these kinds of things. And I think it's very useful that when you have a public that is engaging in this and you're feeding information into it not truths that are being fed into it, it festers lovely, because you have people that are adamant what they believe, then you have people that don't, and you just continue to let that run its cycle to do that. Nowadays with the internet, I think you're putting in lots of information because you can't really control it, so you're flooding the field with lots of data to track what people are talking about, as well as dilute some of that truth.
But this thing about blaming it on our secret tech, this is an old game. 35 years ago, during the wave of sightings over the little nation of Belgium, UFO researchers remember this very well. So there were these triangular types of objects that were being seen, hovering low. Police officers everyone was reporting this. And then you start getting these utterly absurd, I would almost say stupid, but believed claims that, maybe it's our B-2 stealth bomber or the stealth fighter, which the world was just learning about at the time. And the stealth fighter, the F-117A Nighthawk, it's angular, looks a little like a triangle, I guess. Damn thing doesn't hover.
Right.
It doesn't have instant acceleration. It can't drop 4,000 feet in 1 second on radar, which these things in Belgium were. So, but yet, this was trotted out. Why? Well, it's obvious why. Because if you didn't have that, then you have to explain this as something much more anomalous, and that's a little less comforting.
Great.
Richard, in your research that you've done, where can you say the most sightings of USO have been? What area? Is it toward the United States, or is it, overseas?
Yeah, good question. Well, part of the problem we have is that U.S. citizens dominate UFO reporting and USO reporting. We're just into it. We do this way more than the Europeans. We even do it more than the South Americans, and they're into their UFOs as well. So reports are skewed toward an American territories. However, I would say, based on everything that I've seen, that the biggest hotspot is probably just north of, around the island of Puerto Rico, would be my guess for number one. There is definitely a lot of activity reported at the infamous Catalina Island, off of LA there, off California. And then another American area that doesn't get any attention, but is really quite active, is the entire northeastern seaboard of the United States, going into Canada. So anything from like the mid-Atlantic, like Virginia, all the way up into like Newfoundland and beyond. That's a very active area. And no one ever really talks about that in terms of being a hotspot. Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America, whatever. That's an active area. But then leaving the Western Hemisphere, South America's got some. I should just mention in and around Buenos Aires. Seen some very interesting cases there, but definitely the South China Sea, Western Pacific, that area is quite active. There's a lot that's been reported there. The Russians reported a number of things in the utterly frigid remote Sea of Okhotsk, which is way up there. There's a number of places where I think, Italy. So Italy. The Italians have they're among Europeans. I think they have possibly the most active UFO and USO reporting around.
Really?
And I became very friendly with Marco Bianchini, who's over at the organization CISU. It's the Italian UFO Center there. And they have been collecting a lot of USO cases. So when I look at the map that I have, I put little yellow pins on my Google Earth for every case. There's a lot going on around Italy. But I wonder, is this because the Italians are just reporting it more? And I think in part it may be. So it's really hard to know. I mean, it's partly like we're going where the reporting is, and the reporting is uneven. So for me to say, like, I know where there's a hotspot, that's pushing it a little bit. There is not a region on this planet where these things have not been seen.
Okay, what about freshwater? What freshwater sightings? Because
we've
had some of those in New York. Can you tell us about freshwater sightings?
Yeah, that's one of the things I tried to that I tracked on my database. So was it in an ocean or sea, or was it in a body of fresh water, lake or a river? So I differentiated all of that. So certainly oceanic sightings were by far the largest number, but quite a few in lakes. The U.S. Great Lakes is quite active, particularly Lake Michigan. But the other Great Lakes were also active to some extent. And then a lot of smaller lakes. And now you, Chris, I recall you talking about some sightings in eastern New York State, like in the Albany area.
Tuxedo Park. It was Tuxedo Park. We had one of the
Where's
most
that?
amazing cases down near Dutchess County.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
So that area's got a lot.
from there. Yeah, we had the triangle, and this was a case that people were telling me that this happens at other places. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it, but we had a triangle hover over a lake. Now, the person who witnessed this was a detective sergeant on the police force for that place, and he was driving by, witnessed this triangle-shaped object hover over the lake, and it dropped a barrel-sized object into the water. It wasn't a barrel, but it was a barrel-sized object. And then for the last 3 or 4 nights, there were headlights going throughout the lake underwater, and they couldn't explain anything. But the mayor, we wanted to put divers into the water to see if what was there, and they absolutely refused. They wouldn't allow divers to come in and go in the water, which I thought was kind of strange. But here's the kicker. Ever since that happened, that there's a circular shape in the lake now that never freezes over. We have a picture of it, and that area does not freeze over. It's in the middle of the lake, and it never freezes. And then they started developing algae blooms in the lake that they've never had a problem before. Now, with algae blooms, it's my understanding that the nitrates and phosphates that run into the lake from, gardening or landscaping and stuff of that nature, you will find it predominantly by the shores, because that's where the higher concentrations. But yet this is in the middle of the lake, right near the area where this thing was dropped.
Chris, you've got to send me this case. I need to put this in my 3rd volume.
I'll have you talk to the witness.
I'd be happy
he's a
to.
detective sergeant. He's retired, and he'll definitely talk to you.
Chris, that reminds me of the Wakefield monster, not too far from where I'm talking to you, gentlemen, from Wakefield, New Hampshire, where it was, with almost very little doubt, a Russian satellite that crashed into a small agricultural pond on a farm. The dog that waded into the water there after it hit later died, and it appears to have died of radiation because the power source. But for a long time, it didn't freeze up on this pond. And a tree that was alongside the shore there died, which was, a very old growth tree. And then eventually the pond went. But of course, it was also one of the classic cases where the recovery team very quickly arrived. There was quite a few people that were there. They pulled stuff out of this little pond, and things recovered and left. And it has the whole pantheon going on there. But when you talked about the activity, and now you have this spot where you have algae and you don't have freezing, tends to tell me that you have some kind of a heat source now that's not normally present in a northern lake that's causing that kind of, could be residual, it could be something that's left behind.
And a light source, because it sounds like it had a headlight.
Right, so now you're going to have some kind of photo synthesis that's going to go on.
That's dropped down by some triangle.
Right. But I mean, obviously it's the F-117s because they haven't retired them yet.
There you go.
So we know that. It's the X model of the 117 that hovers. Come on.
I'll just say that whole region, there's a lot of tiny little lakes all over the place there. It's dotted with like an virtual infinity of little lakes and ponds.
It's like Minnesota, just on a small
exactly.
scale.
And up in Canada, which has got even more than any. But there's a lot in New York State and going into New England. And there are I've tracked quite a few USO cases in those regions. One, I'll just, if I can mention, I'll try to be efficient here. One of my favorite ones, I love this case, from 1955. And it was investigated by a group which was quite active at the time called Civilian Saucer Investigation. They were, for like a couple of years, they were making it happen. And they had a lot of smart people there. And they interviewed this husband and wife couple. So there was this couple liked to do night fishing. This was like their thing. They both were into it. So they're out at this place called the Titicus Reservoir. It's in New York State. It might be in Dutchess County. It's in that general area. It's a lower portion of New York, north of New York City. And in 1955, this place was quite a bit more laid back and rural and country than it is today. So they're on this reservoir. It's like a small lake. It's like 2 miles long, maybe a little more than half a mile wide. Nice little size. And at night, only rowboats were allowed on it at the time. So no motorboats. And they get there, it's midnight, and there's no one there. So they drove, they had a parking lot, they took a rowboat, they rowed for like a mile to this one spot for whatever reason. And and they both see this light come up from the water. Otherwise, it's pitch black. This light comes up from the water, and it's like a, excuse me. It's like orange, it's like the size of a basketball. It's an orb. And it comes out of the water. And then there's these two very long, like 30 feet long each, like bluish white tubes, almost like, he said, almost like fluorescent tubes, except more bluish. There's two of those and this orange thing. So they're looking at this, and the wife is like, I want us to get the hell out of here now. But the husband says, I want to go out and take a look at this thing. So
bad idea.
At the shore, he gets in the rowboat and he starts rowing out in the dark, in the pitch black, toward this thing. I can only imagine what she was saying to him at the time. Anyway, so he goes, but as he gets closer to it, he realizes he's not getting closer to it because it's moving away from him very quietly. And that spooks him a little bit. And he's like, you know what? Maybe I'm going to get back to shore after all. So he rows back to his wife, and they're both like, we're getting out of here now. But now they have to get back into the rowboat, and they have to row for about a mile back to where they started. And as they did that, this object or whatever this is following them, and it's shining light on their boat and on them at various times. It had to have scared the living daylights out of them, but they made it back. They get out of the boat, they walk to their car, and even from the parking lot, they were able to see the lights on the water. They do not know what happened after that, but it was an extended encounter. And one of them knew how to contact Civilian Saucer Investigation, and they did an extended analysis, which I read, which is in Ivan Sanderson's great book from 1970, Invisible Residents. He did a really nice treatment of it, but so I lifted it from there. But to me, I love that story because it's from the same region that you're talking about, Chris, but also I just love it because it's got this great human element to it.
Absolutely.
Like many of these do. And this is just one. You could make like a mini movie out of that event.
My last question to you, Richard, before I turn it over to Dan, is I have investigated cases where not only do they come out of the water, but they funnel up water to their craft.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's been a lot of cases that way where they hover, funnel up water, take off. And the research I tried to do, why would they want water? Okay, they're not going to drink it. I mean, it's just not something there.
Maybe if they know how to purify it to their own satisfaction, maybe they could.
Oh, you got me there. Yeah.
I mean, why not?
The one thing I heard Lou Alzando say is that they were starting to talk about hydrogen. He didn't want to talk about hydrogen. So I started saying, okay, can you process water to separate the hydrogen? Now, we know we can do that. But do we have the technology to take hydrogen, turn it into helium-4? Now, once we do that, isn't that the power of the sun? And could this be a fuel for them?
Some kind of fusion. I don't know. As far as what separating hydrogen out of water, we've been doing that since the 60s. That's what nuclear submarines can do, to stay underwater for months at a time. They're not carrying oxygen tanks down there, so they're getting the water out of the oxygen, out of the water you split off the oxygen. That's called hydrolysis, I think. So they can do that. As far as what else they might be doing, using water as a form of energy, hell, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not.
It's just curious that Lou Elizondo didn't want to, when they hit about the idea of hydrogen fueling these ships, he didn't want to talk about that at all. It wasn't that he didn't know. No. He kind of shot the whole subject down.
Next time I see Lou, I'm going to ask him myself. But hydrogen into helium, that the sun does do that. That's right. And then it goes further and further to heavier and heavier metals or elements, and that's what nuclear fusion is.
With all your research, with all your research, do you believe there's an underwater civilization?
I think there are underwater bases. I do believe that. You could call them a society. I don't know if they're permanent or temporary. I mean, there's all kinds of theories. Did they have they lived here for thousands of years under the water? I don't have any reason to think that that's the case. When I went through as many ancient USO cases as I looked for all of them. How far back could we go? I didn't really find any that truly persuaded me prior to the year 1717. That is the first case that I can say I'm confident in this one. There's earlier ones. I looked at the Christopher Columbus sighting from 1492. That's interesting. I don't think that's a slam dunk. There's some other potential early USO cases, some from China and Japan, that are interesting. But the problem with the earliest cases is they're very threadbare, and it's very hard to know what you're really dealing with. So it's possible that there's been a long-standing water-based presence, but I can't really say that confidently. What I tend to think is that the USOs, kind of like UFOs, in the sense that there's reason to think they've been here for a long time, but for a very long time, in my opinion, at a very low level, monitoring, observation, and not much interaction. This is what I think. And I think it picked up significantly once we hit the age of science. And sightings become more numerous. Yes, partly we're exploring around the world. We're better able at seeing them. Yes, that has to be taken into effect. You know, people in ancient times were outdoors more than we are. And they did record wonders in the sky, as Chris Aubeck and Jack Valet called it. But you got to go often centuries between decent recorded sightings back then. I mean, it's not like they were happening or being recorded every day. Literacy was less. Yes, we all know that. But I don't know. I would think that if there was more, we would know. And there's not a lot of evidence. And plus, those ancient sightings, a lot of them, they're really not that great when you really read them carefully. They don't describe physical craft most of the time. They will describe light phenomena, which can be interesting. I'm not saying it's meaningless, but I'm saying that evidence is not as strong as a lot of people assume. So where are they? What's the extent of their society? Well, I mean, it could make a lot of sense for a visiting intelligence to go into the water for a lot of reasons. If you're observing the humans, that might be a great place because the humans aren't getting down there and you're secure. Also, I learned this from listening to Kevin Newth, who's become a friend of mine, and he's very knowledgeable, talks about this, teaches over at Albany. He said, look, you know, I'm dumbing it down so I can understand, but like the temperature fluctuations are much less in water than in atmosphere. The pressure changes are much less. You don't have to deal with atmospheric pressure changes. You don't have to deal with solar radiation if that's not good for you. The ocean provides protection for that. There's all kinds of insulations that you get in a body of water that you would not get out of a body of water. So it could be an attractive place. Plus, humans are less able to snoop around down there. So there would be good reasons to set up a base. We do have the ability to go under the ocean floor to build bases. You know, when I used to live in the New York City area, I used to drive in the Lincoln Tunnel all the time. That's below the water. It's, you know, you're going below the Hudson River there. So we know how to do that. We have the English Channel that's over 20 miles connecting England to France under the ocean floor. So if we can do that, it wouldn't strike me as inconceivable that a visiting civilization would have a base somewhere inside an ocean mountain or under the ocean floor somewhere. And they don't even have to go down to the bottom of the Pacific. You know, there's a lot of ocean shelves that are just a few hundred feet down rather than 15,000 feet down. So there's a lot of places where they could go, and it might not be that difficult, and it could be quite secure.
And here's my follow-up question to that. I've done a lot of abduction cases. I've never had one that a person was on a boat or out in the ocean.
They're rare.
Yeah.
Rare.
Have you ever heard of them, though? Yes. I have not.
Well, I have a few in my books. Where
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
An abduction. A few.
Right.
But they are quite rare. And this gives me a chance to mention something else. Like, I've often heard people say things like, well, you know, 50% of all UFO sightings occur over bodies of water. Or you hear some variation of this. And I don't really think that's a very meaningful thing. First of all, when I've been looking for USO cases, as I mentioned, I went through the MUFON database in great detail. I went through the National UFO Reporting Center in excruciating detail. I went through thousands and thousands of cases. And I had to do that because I'm looking for anything that had to do with water, especially contact with water. So those are rare, relatively speaking.
But they have.
No, they do happen. They're an important subset, but they're not as USOs. Sometimes I think people just go a little overboard and they're like, oh yeah, USOs, that's the biggest part of this phenomenon. It is not in terms of quantity, it isn't. At least in terms of, observed quantity, you know, what we're able to see. There may be a lot going on in the middle of the Pacific, but I'm not out there and most people aren't, so it's hard to know. And by the way, Chris, you mentioned the pillars of water phenomenon. I'll just mention here, I included a number of those cases in my collection. There were a number that I did not include, and I could have, but part of my reasoning was, well, are those USOs? So if an object comes low over the water and you start seeing water getting sucked up, you know, it's almost debatable. Is that actually a USO? And for the most part, I would tend to think no. But I included some of them anyway, just because they are interesting. And there are cases when objects would come out of the water, and there would be a column of water beneath it that sometimes would fall away, or sometimes you wondered if they're sucking up the water. So
that's very interesting. Dan.
I did some oceanography studies in college, and there's some things that perplex me. Most ocean life is in the top 200 feet because it's dependent upon sunlight. And so once you get below, in many parts of the world, 200 or 300 feet, it's pitch black and it's very cold down there. And so if these things are being seen, they're operating in what we call the higher water column. And also there's a lot of biodiversity within those layers. If these things are zipping along at ungodly speeds below the surface, how are they not rear-ending a marlin or a blue whale? Or have there been instances where marine life has been impacted in one way or another by the presence of a USO?
That's a fantastic question. I can't think for these people, so I don't want to try to give a definitive answer, but a couple of things come to mind. One, they're easily able to travel below that biosphere level that you're talking about. You know, below 300 feet. I learned this as well. I'm no oceanographer, but I did, pick this fact up. And, submarines as well. I mean, they can all operate below the level of 200, 300 feet. Submarines can go, often as down as 1,000 feet or even sometimes more. And these objects can do the same. But a lot of them are seen, though, near the surface. It's true. So one thing that I learned is, and this is partly through the late Carl Feind, because he wrote his book not just to track USO accounts, but really to study scientifically the relationship of UFOs to water. And not just water, but like fog and rain. And he was into all of that. But he talked about the effect of ionization around these craft. So how it could, create the glowing effect that we often associate with UFOs, but also the fact that they can create a kind of pocket around themselves that insulates them from the other water. It might go some way to explain how they can seemingly engage in such very high speeds under the water that our submarines cannot possibly achieve because of the cavitation effect caused by the ionization. And I wonder if they've got the ionization effect and they're zipping through the water, could it be, and I'm just spitballing here, that they're, instead of hitting that marlin and destroying it, that the marlin is basically being pushed aside
Little bumper car.
by the ionization. I don't know if that's scientifically sound, but
Well, one thing, of course, that you would have, a marlin is a fairly small fish compared to, say, a submarine or a submersible object. But if you have a larger creature, let's say a whale, even a small whale at 20 or 30 feet, weighing several tons, that's not something you just nudge out of the way. I mean, you would have to be interacting farther ahead in some way to do that. But I was curious, and the second part of the question that I had before was, have there been any negative interactions with sea life associated with a USO, a fish kill, sudden illness in certain species, anything like that you observed in your studies?
yes, sometimes there would be reports of dead fish coming to shore. In a small number of cases that I can kind of recall vaguely. Other than that, I mean, I'm not saying that's insignificant, but beyond that, I don't know of an instance where like a whale or large creature died as a result of an interaction with a USO. But I mean, it certainly could have happened. But in the reports that I'm reading, that is not something that came up very much, I have to say. Occasional reports of dead fish.
It'd be interesting to see if there were any like dolphin or whale beachings or something in the vicinity.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, I've not seen that, but you can't rule something like that out.
Commander.
So, Richard, turning to matters out of your USO book, and I look forward to picking it up and reading it. We had earlier, I should say late last year, earlier on the calendar, a lot of activity with UAPs in the New Jersey area, and then it spread through. I'd like your thoughts on that. What do you think was going on there?
I'll give a shout out to Christian in the chat room there. He's a member of my website. Hey, Christian. I saw he asked one of those questions. The whole this phenomenon of the mystery drones, as I came to call them, I look at that as a classic UFO flap. I've come to see it as really no different. I know that there are many people who describe them as explicitly drones, but when you really get into the details of some of these cases, they don't seem like drones. Not all of them. Many of them have been described as orbs and indeed almost like disc-shaped craft or similar to disc-shaped craft. They have been. We heard reports. How do you confirm these? Of them coming out of the water off the coast of New Jersey. I heard about this. A fleet of them harassing a U.S. Coast Guard vessel at one point. Is this true or not? I think it's true. One of the problems with the sightings of mystery drones has simply been to get confirmation, like to the extent that a UFO investigator would properly want. I don't know how much of that's really been done, honestly. Everyone's like got their little phone cameras and they're recording this and that, and you wonder, like, is this real? Is this BS? And then I'm assuming most of it's probably real, but does that mean they're actually what they appear to be? Again, like there's just, we did not get enough investigation on this, at least that I'm aware of. I could be wrong here, but investigations where like MUFON investigators are on the ground and interviewing witnesses and actually trying to put a report together on this. Maybe someone's working on that now. I hope so. Because it needs to be done, because it looks to me that it was something very significant. It seems to have died away. Of course, they never fully die away. And then the other thing to ask about this wave or flap, like in the past, in the history of UFOs, These things happen. That is a concentrated amount of sightings in a specific geographic area for a certain period of time. Now, in this case, where the hell is this flap located? Was it in the UK where they were reported for a while? Is it over New Jersey where they were reported, or New York City, or Long Island, or Connecticut, or Ramstein Air Base in Germany, or in California? You start hearing about them there. And then you start thinking, okay, what's actually happening here? Because the fact is, if you go into, I mentioned the National UFO Reporting Center because it's public and anyone can go there. Well, hell, you're going to find 15 to 20 sightings every day in the United States alone, usually. Does that mean they're part of the same flap? Probably not. So there's a lot of noise in this that I just don't feel we have been able yet to get to the bottom of it so that we can be confident about our data. It surely looks like something real was happening. Certainly over like the UK bases, hell yes. Ramstein, yes. New Jersey, obviously. And like a lot of these flaps of the past, I don't like to make a lot of predictions, but sometimes I'll make a prediction. And what I said here was, I'm going to predict this is going to be like every flap of the past in which we are not going to get closure. And we never do.
Well, I mean, Richard, we had the situation that occurred out in the Midwest, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas. Colorado. There was all kinds of UAP activity that was going on out there that seemed to be this drone stuff. There was stuff seen during the day. There was countless reports about that. What I find interesting is there's a mix between to me, is undoubtedly foreign powers using fairly simple, fairly pervasive equipment to go out and just take a look to see what they can gather for intel.
Well, they got to be careful if they're going to do that.
Oh, sure, but
I mean, let's like Russians and Chinese. Let's just say. So I'm very skeptical of this idea.
So you're skeptical of the guy in Virginia whose small drone got stuck in the tree of the yard, rang the doorbell of the guy and asked for help to get it out, and then left when the guy said, "I need to see your driver's license," and took a picture of it with his phone and jumped in his car and left. And he was arrested. He was flying over Norfolk with a fairly good system to gather intel just to see what he could get.
I'm not saying that type of thing doesn't happen. I'm saying that I'm skeptical that the Russians and Chinese or Iranians are behind it. I'm very doubtful.
No. I think it was pretty idiotic to think there was a mothership from Iran off the coast of New Jersey that was running this. I agree with you. Again, I don't think that those kinds of statements are put into play by accident. I think that is part of a deception program, regardless of who wants to do that, to drive a discussion into a certain direction.
Yeah, particularly if you don't have the answer and some of these are genuinely mysterious.
Absolutely. And I think, again, when you look at it, when you can peel away human activity, you really get down to what I consider the very interesting portion of it. Because there's undoubtedly a lot of the activity in New Jersey, and I have absolutely no doubt, was hobbyists and other people that are interested, that are doing this, that joined it. Oh, good looking.
She wants my attention.
Oh, oh, look at that. Oh, he's even hugging you. That tells you, if that doesn't tell the world everything, I don't know what does.
Right? You know, and that is
just being a little insistent there.
And you know what? That is a good time to end this program. The 2 hours have flown by, but the producer says, hey, get off the air. But, folks, before we leave, The History of UFOs by Richard Dolan. It's one of his greatest books, probably. But all his books are great. So I encourage you to go out and get it. And, Richard, real quick, where can you get the book?
Oh, well, Amazon.com. Whoops, I just knocked over a bunch of papers, and my cat just ran off my lap. Amazon's, just if you type in Dolan USO on Amazon, you'll find them. I have links on my website, which is richarddolanmembers.com. And I got to just say, I'm very happy with the reviews. A lot of people are starting to like it. It's very gratifying to read. And I want to say, I love this book, and I love the other two that are coming out. This was a real labor of love for me. It was hard work, but honestly, it has been an absolutely fascinating project, and I'm so glad that I ended up going into this subject of USOs, because it was beyond fascinating. It went into the areas of mind blowing for me.
Richard, thank you so much for being. Thank you so much for being with us
again
tonight.
soon, Richard. Again soon.
Yes,
Thank you, guys.
and,
It was a pleasure.
great, folks. That's our show. UAP Crossfire. Richard, good night. Gang, good night.